Under the blazing lights of Congress, Melania Trump mocked Jasmine Crockett's mother with ruthless arrogance. But Jasmine fired back with fierce condemnation, revealing a 1985 Reagan letter that left lawmakers stunned, shook the airwaves, and shocked tens of millions watching live. What deadly line in that letter destroyed Melania instantly? Stay with us, this is a story worth every second of your time. The Capitol chamber burned under the floodlights, every face caught in high definition as millions watched live. Cameras panned slowly across lawmakers, their jaws tight, their eyes fixed while the sharp click of shutters and the scrape of a chair carved through the silence like blades. The tension was suffocating, every second dragging like the countdown to an explosion. Melania Trump sat with her legs crossed, chin lifted, a cold gleam in her eyes. Then her voice cracked through the stillness. Your mother left nothing but a forgotten name. No president ever heard of her. No event ever recorded her. She was nothing but a shadow in the crowd. The words hit like shrapnel detonating in the chamber, broadcast to every home in America. For a moment, time stopped. Reporters froze, mid-keystroke whispers died on lawmakers' lips. The camera locked on Jasmine Crockett, motionless eyes dark and heavy, a storm caged behind calm restraint. The silence roared, arrogance had drawn first blood, but truth was about to strike back. Then, like a predator sensing blood, Melania leaned back into her chair. Her fingers tapped against the polished wood of the table, her gaze sliding toward Jasmine with the smugness of someone convinced the victory was already hers. She inhaled slow and deliberate before her voice cut through again. I have stood in the White House more times than I can count. She began, her tone dripping with pride. I have been there at the heart of this nation, beside its leaders, representing what America shows the world. I remember the glow of Christmas with President George W. Bush standing at his side in front of the nation's tree. I remember walking through those grand doors with Donald greeting foreign leaders, kings, queens, and presidents. She tilted her chin, her eyes glittering. That is what honor looks like. That is what it means to be recognized by history. The words rang loud, echoing against the chamber's walls. She shifted slightly, turning her entire body toward Jasmine, now no longer pretending to address the room. Her smile widened, sharp as glass. You know, national honor is not for the nameless, she sneered. Your mother never stood near the White House. She was never mentioned in any ceremony. Not once did a president even know her name. The cruelty was deliberate, each sentence delivered like a blade designed to slice dignity into shreds. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter rolled from the far corner, low and cutting, as a few conservative lawmakers exchanged smirks. Melania leaned forward again, hands folded, her voice lowering into a tone that carried even more venom. If she had truly mattered, at least one president would have known her. At least one would have said her name. But no one did. Not one. She passed through this world unnoticed, forgotten, invisible. She let the words hang there, savoring the silence as they twisted through the chamber like poison. That is the painful truth. The chamber responded with a few muffled chuckles, some barely disguised snickers from the back rows. Each sound hit like a drumbeat, pounding the humiliation deeper into the air. The camera cut swiftly to Jasmine. Her hands were gripping the folder on the table so tightly her knuckles were white. Her lips pressed into a firm line, refusing to crack. But she did not speak. She did not rise. She simply sat still. Her silence heavier than any shout, her control, the only shield against the storm battering her name. Viewers at home felt the weight of the imbalance. They saw a chamber tilting, the smugness of Melania casting a shadow over the room. Every smirk, every mocking laugh, every cruel syllable pushed the scale further against Jasmine. The sense was undeniable. Melania was in control, towering with arrogance, her words landing unchallenged. For now the stage belonged to her, and the tension climbed higher like a rope stretched to the point of breaking. The chamber had just echoed with Melania's last strike, and the weight of her words lingered in the air like smoke. Reporters lowered their pens for a beat, waiting for Jasmine Crockett to answer, but no sound came. Jasmine sat still, her posture upright, her gaze fixed not on Melania, but on the empty air in front of her, as if her eyes had locked on to something far beyond the chamber. The silence around her was alive, vibrating with pressure, daring her to move, to speak, to fight back. Yet she did not. Not yet. The cameras shifted. A single lens zoomed closer, closing in on Jasmine's face, every flicker of expression magnified on screens across America. Beads of sweat dotted her temple, glistening under the relentless lights. Her breathing slowed, steady but heavy, her chest rising in controlled rhythm. The tension in her jaw was visible, her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes began to burn brighter, shifting from shadow to steel. The nation watched as her silence became louder than any words Melania had spoken. In that unbearable stillness, every second dragged, punctuated by nothing but the sound of air moving through microphones. It was as if Jasmine's heartbeat had been amplified into every living room in the country. The camera did not move away. It lingered merciless, showing the storm forming behind her eyes. This was the kind of silence that screamed, the kind that announced a reckoning was about to arrive. And then a memory flickered inside her mind, uninvited but fierce and clear. She saw her mother again back in the mid-1980s in the modest hall of a church in Dallas. Her mother's hands were busy holding clipboards, guiding people, urging them to give blood when the city's supply had run dangerously low. The church smelled faintly of wax and disinfectant, but her mother never stopped moving. Her blouse was stained with drops of dried blood from donated bags she had carried, yet her face wore nothing but a radiant smile. Jasmine remembered standing small in the corner, watching her mother clasp the hand of a nervous donor and whisper, "You're saving lives today." That moment had burned itself into Jasmine's memory like fireproof that her mother's worth had never needed a president's recognition. The memory cut through the present like a blade. Jasmine's fingers tightened on the folder before her, the edges biting into her skin. The sweat on her temple caught the light shining like a mark of resolve. She did not move, but the silence around her grew heavier, almost unbearable, pressing down on every shoulder in the chamber. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing the storm gathering, sensing that Melania's cruel triumph was only temporary. The camera pulled back just enough to capture the room itself. The restless shuffle of papers, the roll of a pen sliding across polished wood. The faint click-click of a camera shutter cracked the silence like static, while a cough and a single throat clearing from a lawmaker echoed far louder than they should have. Every small sound magnified the stillness, turning it into a suffocating weight. This was not just silence. It was suspense coiled tight and waiting to strike. It was the calm before the explosion, the stillness before thunder splits the sky. Every eye knew it. Every heart felt it. This was the storm's inhale, and Jasmine Crockett was holding it, waiting, preparing, ready to release it in a way that would shake the chamber to its core. The silence had stretched to breaking the chamber, heavy with anticipation, when Jasmine finally moved. With a sudden motion, she slammed the thick folder onto the desk. The sharp crack of paper and wood reverberated through the chamber like a gunshot. Reporters jolted, cameras jerked, and for a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then she slowly unlatched the worn leather strap, her hands steady, her face carved from stone. From inside, she drew out a weathered golden envelope, its corners curled, its surface faintly stained by time. She lifted it high under the blinding overhead lights, the parchment glowing against the white glare. Her voice came low, but each word was heavy and deliberate, echoing through the microphone. "You said no president ever knew my mother. Then what is this?" The words sliced through the room like steel, drawing every eye to the fragile envelope raised in her hand. The laughter, the whispers, the smugness of moments before collapsed into a stunned, suffocating silence. Jasmine's fingers eased the envelope open, careful but unshaken. She pulled out a single sheet of crisp, cream-colored stationery. The camera lenses zoomed in tight, projecting every detail onto screens across the nation. The seal of the White House gleamed in its embossed relief at the top, untouched by decades. Below it, clear and undeniable, the date July 15th, 1985. The signature at the bottom, bold sweeping, was the name every American over 50 knew by heart, Ronald Reagan. Gas rippled through the chamber. Lawmakers leaned forward, squinting to see with their own eyes. Jasmine raised the letter higher, and her voice sharpened into a blade. "This is a letter from President Ronald Reagan to my mother, thanking her for leading a blood drive that brought thousands of donations when this country faced a critical shortage. A president called my mother the woman who kept America alive." Her eyes scanned the page. Then she read directly from it, the words trembling, not from her voice, but from the sheer gravity they carried. "Dear Mrs. Crockett, Your tireless efforts have inspired countless Americans to give selflessly. At a time when our nation needed it most, you have given the gift of life to those you will never meet. In my heart and in the hearts of the families you have touched, you will always be remembered as someone who helped keep America alive. With gratitude, Ronald Reagan. The chamber erupted. Chairs scraped back, lawmakers shot to their feet, reporters shouted into recorders, and the gallery buzzed with disbelief. Some clapped hands to their mouths, others turned to one another in shock. The sound was a storm of voices, an avalanche of reaction. Jasmine lowered the letter slowly, her gaze locked on Melania. Across the table, Melania sat frozen. Her lips parted, but no words came. The color drained from her face, her composure shattered. She had fired every insult, every sneer, but now she sat in silence, cornered by a truth older and stronger than her arrogance. For the first time that day, the First Lady of Disdain had nothing left to say. The roar of reaction had barely settled when the cameras began their slow sweep across the chamber. Lawmakers leaned into one another, whispering with urgency, their faces etched with disbelief. Pens scratched furiously across notebooks, reporters hammering at keyboards as though the story might vanish if they hesitated. The gallery buzzed with movement, a restless tide of murmurs and gasps. Every lens, every microphone, every heartbeat in the room seemed locked on what had just been revealed. From the second row, a congressman's voice slipped into the air, just loud enough to be caught by a mic. "If this is real, that's a knockout." The words spread like fire, repeated in hushed echoes through the chamber. Even those who had chuckled at Melania moments before now sat stiff, their smirks gone, their eyes wide. The weight of Reagan's signature hung over the room like a verdict carved in stone. Melania tried to hold her composure. She forced a smile, lips trembling at the edges, but her body betrayed her. Her hands shook as she reached for the glass of water before her. The liquid rippled inside the rim, quivering against the wood as she set it down. Across the nation, viewers saw it, the small tremor that shattered the illusion of control. Jasmine said nothing. She let the silence stretch again, let the image of that shaking hand burn into memory. She wanted the audience to feel the evidence sink deep, to let the truth wound before she struck the final blow. The chamber was already shaking with tension when Jasmine lifted the page, her hands steady as stone. The camera cut in close, filling every television screen across America with the faded White House letterhead. She took a breath, let the silence stretch, and then her voice struck like a gavel. Slow, deliberate, heavy, she pressed each word into the air. You have kept America alive. The line fell into the room like thunder. No one moved, no one breathed. It wasn't just a sentence, it was a verdict, a declaration from history itself. The sound of it rolled over the crowd, echoing in the marble walls, searing itself into memory. On the television feeds, the phrase appeared again and again in captions burning across screens as though branded into the national conscience. The audience at home could feel the weight of those 5 words hammering against their hearts. Jasmine's eyes lifted from the page. She looked directly at Melania, her expression unwavering, her voice clear and cutting. The woman you called invisible was named by a president as the silent savior of America. The words were measured, deliberate, each syllable hammering down like the final strikes in a courtroom. Melania had thrown insult after insult, but Jasmine had just ended the argument with one sentence tethered to history. The response was volcanic. Lawmakers rose in a wave, the chamber erupting into applause that thundered against the ceiling. Reporters shouted over one another, cameras flashed like lightning, and the gallery shook with gasps and cries. Some lawmakers clapped with tears running down their cheeks, overcome by the collision of past and present. It was no longer a hearing, it was a reckoning broadcast to the world. And then the screen flickered. The press gallery pulled up a photo. Every American remembered Melania in 2018, stepping off a plane to visit immigrant children, wearing the jacket that screamed in bold white paint, "I really don't care, do you?" The image hung in the air like a ghost, cruel and unforgettable. The contrast was immediate, merciless. One woman had worn indifference on her back for the world to see. Another woman, decades earlier, had carried blood bags, stained her blouse, and smiled through exhaustion to save strangers she would never meet. The chamber absorbed the image with collective shock. Melania's hand trembled against the desk, her forced smile shattering her eyes, darting helplessly between the damning photo and the letter raised in Jasmine's hand. For the first time, she looked cornered, small stripped of her polished armor. The message could not have been clearer. History had already chosen sides. Jasmine's mother stood tall as an unsung hero immortalized by Reagan's words. Melania was left exposed, her cruelty mirrored against her own indifference. It was the knockout moment. 5 words had ended the fight. The roar of the chamber still lingered in the air, the echoes of Jasmine's words hanging like smoke after an explosion. Then in the eye of that storm, the cameras caught Melania. Her chin dropped, her gaze slipped to the desk, and for the first time all day, she refused to meet the lens. The pride that had carried her through insult after insult drained away. Shoulders hunched, her posture sagged, the polished confidence replaced by something smaller, brittle and human. The woman who had mocked so loudly was now silent, cornered by truth too sharp to escape. Jasmine did not rush. She let the silence return heavy and cutting. Then she leaned into the microphone. Her voice was calm, deliberate, but every syllable struck like iron. Honor does not sit in the gilded chairs of the White House. It lives in the blood given to save a fellow American's life. The words rolled through the hall steady as thunder, leaving no room for doubt, no space for spin. It was the conclusion of everything said, that day the final nail hammered into stone. The chamber exploded again this time, not in shock, but in unity. Applause rained down from every corner, hands slamming together with the force of conviction. Some lawmakers clapped until their palms turned red, refusing to stop. The sound went on, rolling like waves crashing against the marble walls. Every clap was a verdict, every cheer a confirmation Jasmine had won. Cameras captured the moment in ruthless detail. On one side of the table, Jasmine stood tall under the blaze of the lights, her shoulders square, her face unflinching. She looked every inch the victor, not because of power or wealth, but because truth itself stood behind her. On the other side, Melania shrank in her chair, her hand curling desperately around a glass of water. The liquid inside trembled with every shake of her fingers, the glass clinking softly against the wood. That tiny sound, magnified through the microphones, told the nation more than any speech could. The image split the chamber in two, not with division, but with contrast. One woman bathed in light, firm and resolute, a figure carved in certainty. The other hunched low, her pride broken, her silence louder than any insult she had spoken. The cameras lingered on that contrast, feeding it to every television, every phone screen, every laptop across the country. For the audience at home, it was unmistakable. This was not just a victory. It was a reckoning. The applause refused to die down. It stretched on second after second, minute after minute, until it no longer sounded like clapping, but like a drumbeat, like the heartbeat of a nation that had just witnessed the truth prevail. Jasmine stood still, allowing it to wash over her, her eyes fixed ahead. Melania never looked up again. This was the final picture. One woman had triumphed with evidence and sacrifice, the other crumbled under her own arrogance. The duel was over, and as the chamber finally fell quiet, the country erupted into motion. News alerts flashed across television tickers, and every major broadcast cut to the same loop: Jasmine raising the Reagan letter into the lights, the seal shining, the signature unmistakable. Anchors spoke in clipped, urgent beats, while producers replayed the clip from 3 angles, slowing the moment her voice delivered the line that shook the room. Chirons screamed across the bottom of the screen, and split-screen stacked pundits who could barely get words out over the reel. The footage rolled again and again. Jasmine's arms steady the letter, steady the truth, steady, until it imprinted itself on the day. On YouTube, the moment detonated. The thumbnail, Jasmine holding the page, the White House seal glowing, shot to the top of trending, and the view counter rolled like a speedometer. In the comments, Americans over 50 poured in, with stories and tears, typing with a gravity that felt like ceremony. I remember that time. Yes, Mrs. Crockett really saved people, one wrote, and thousands echoed it word for word beneath. Others added simple, aching details, lines at church basements, coffee in paper cups, the sting of antiseptic, a nurse's hand that did not let go. The clip became a porch light for memory, and people gathered. Editorials and primetime panels found the message before anyone had to spell it out. You don't need power to be remembered. You need purpose. The nation watched a forgotten act of service punch through decades and stand taller than any title, taller than any podium. The phrase quiet courage threaded through monologues and headlines, a new shorthand for what the letter had named out loud. Kids asked their parents what the 80s felt like. Parents answered with the sound of church choirs and the sight of rolled-up sleeves. Across living rooms, the lesson landed: the loudest deeds are not always the greatest ones. Then the phone trees and email blasts began to move. National charities, local blood centers, and veterans groups lit their social feeds with a call: honor the unsung. Donation pages swapped banners: give this week in someone's name, and sign-up forms sprouted a new field: nominate an unsung hero. Community centers announced Sunday tributes. Small-town papers opened columns for letters about the helpers no one thanked enough. A coalition stitched together a simple pledge: we will remember the quiet work. And as the clip kept looping, so did the response, line by line. Name by name, a country turned its attention to the people who never asked for it and finally got it. And as the clip kept looping, something shifted from breaking news to living lesson. By Monday morning, schools were weaving the moment into civics classes, not as gossip, but as groundwork. Teachers printed the paragraph that mattered: you have kept America alive, and taped it beside the flag, then asked students to define honor in plain words. In homerooms, they watched the footage, paused on the White House seal, and compared it to a person's quiet choices in their own town. A veteran teacher told her, class civics is not only laws, it's the hands that carry us when the laws are not enough. Assignments went out: name an unsung helper, write what they did, and explain why a president's thank you matters less than the act itself. The primetime talk shows picked it up and sharpened it. Producers freeze-framed the letter, highlighted the signature, and stacked panels from left and right with a rare unity in their tone. One host said, this wasn't just a slap to Melania, it was a reminder to America, and the line echoed across networks like a drum. Analysts mapped the arc: insult, silence, evidence, reckoning, and asked why the audience recognized truth faster than spin. Another guest added, when the facts are this clear, you don't debate them, you learn from them. For once, the chyron under the talking heads felt less like fuel and more like a mirror. Then the call went out beyond the screen. The Veterans Association and the American Red Cross launched a joint campaign called Unsung Heroes, their sites flipping to a Navy banner with a simple pledge: honor the helpers. Public service announcements ran between segments, showing church basements, gym floors, and mobile clinics, and ended with nominate one, be one. A special emblem, two hands cradling a drop within a wreath, appeared on posters and pins, and phone banks opened for blood drive signups. Chapters set dates for community tributes, promising a podium, a photo, and a thank you large enough to be heard. The message was clear: do the work, tell the story, pass it on. Night after night, call-in lines lit up with voices from the 80s, voices that carried gravel and memory. A retired trucker choked up on live television. We lined up before dawn behind that church. I remember the smell of coffee and bleach, and I remember her telling us, one bag saves three. A former parish nurse said we ran out of bandages at noon and kept going with gauze and tape. Hearing President Reagan's name again brought it all back, and she stopped, cried, and the host let the silence hold. Another caller, once a shy high school senior, said, she held my hand and said, you're brave. I felt 10 feet tall. Across living rooms, people cried with them. Soon the story moved where politics cannot live into rhythm, ritual, and everyday speech. A late-night monologue dropped the punchline and kept the moral, sending viewers to a donation link before the credits rolled. A country singer paused a concert to repeat the line, you have kept America alive, and dedicated the chorus to nurses and volunteers. A basketball team ran out wearing warm-ups that read unsung across the chest for one night only. In galleries and feeds, artists paired the letter's seal with drawings of hands passing a blood bag, and the image spread like a modern folk icon. Memes came and went, but the emblem stayed. Classrooms circled back deeper now. Districts sent out optional lesson plans labeled Service as Citizenship, pairing the letter with students' profiles of cafeteria workers, crossing guards, and neighbors who kept the lights on during storms. Libraries hosted unsung nights where people stood up, named someone who helped them, and rang a small bell. Local papers ran weekly columns that began, this week's helper is, and the habit felt old and brand new at once. Hashtags trended: sure, But the real trend was doors opening early and lines forming again at mobile clinics. What started as a confrontation had crossed into culture, and the culture answered back. And from the chamber's thunder, the digital storm erupted. Within hours, the clip of Jasmine raising the Reagan letter dominated YouTube. The thumbnail burned into the trending page, her arm extended, the White House seal gleaming in the light. The view counter spun upward like a meter breaking its limits, 10 million, then 20, then 30 million. On TikTok, teenagers cut the footage into 15-second bursts, pairing it with dramatic music and captions in bold red. On Facebook, the longer version spread among older audiences, tagged with messages like, "Watch this until the end, and this is what truth looks like." It wasn't just a clip anymore. It was a national pulse. The newspapers followed with the same urgency. The New York Times splashed the headline across the front page in bold black type, "The Reagan letter and the Jasmine moment." The Washington Post mirrored it the same morning, calling the hearing a rare flash of honesty in an age of noise. Even Fox News, usually cautious with praise for Jasmine, put the words on its homepage with the caption, "A letter that stunned Washington." The unanimity itself became a story. 3 outlets, 3 different audiences, all carrying the same image of the letter, the same moment frozen in time. Readers stood in checkout lines, staring at front pages that no one could ignore. Then the historians stepped in, voices measured but eyes alight. Panels on PBS and university live streams framed the moment as more than a confrontation. They called it a pivot. One professor leaned into the microphone and declared, "This will be remembered as the rebirth of collective memory. For decades, we forgot the small acts that held us together. Tonight, a single letter pulled them back into the light." Another added, "In the annals of hearings, this one breaks the mold." It wasn't a policy debate. It was history standing up in real time. The words carried weight, not just analysis, but a reminder the story had already left politics behind and entered the timeline of culture. Across the country, older Americans felt the pull strongest. Retirement homes set up common rooms with big screens, replaying the footage for residents who sat with tissues in hand. Men and women in their 60s and 70s wept as they told the same story again and again, lining up in church basements, rolling up sleeves, filling bags of blood because someone asked them to. One man told a local station, "I was 19, nervous as hell, but she told me I was saving lives." Hearing Reagan's words again, it brought me back. A woman added through tears, "I carried sandwiches for the donors." I never thought anyone would remember. But now they do. Their voices cracked, but their pride was whole. The comments online became a second archive of memory. Under every upload of the clip, thousands of messages flooded in. "I was there in '85. My mother donated that week. I remember the drive. She was the one organizing." The digital world turned into a living museum, each account a shard of proof, each recollection another stitch in the fabric of collective truth. The story grew not because it was told once, but because it was retold by everyone who had lived a piece of it. As the noise reached a peak, commentators began to strip it down to the essence. They played the clip muted, letting the words appear in captions alone. "You have kept America alive." Then they froze the screen and asked, "What does it mean for us now?" Panelists answered with the clarity of people who knew the moment had already escaped politics. It meant sacrifice mattered. It meant evidence outlived arrogance. It meant history had teeth. And when the clip ended, silence filled studios the same way it had filled the chamber. The lesson crystallized. Truth can be buried, but history digs it back out. The Reagan letter had sat unseen for decades, a relic in a drawer. Yet when it surfaced, it shattered a facade built on mockery and arrogance. One old page can still shift the weight of a nation's stage. That sentence, threaded through editorials, whispered in classrooms, shouted in podcasts. People repeated it not as commentary, but as mantra, as if anchoring themselves to a fact no smear could shake. And above all, the line that stuck deepest was the simplest: honor does not come from power. It comes from love of your people. Night after night, the footage replayed, and night after night, the message landed harder. No gilded chair, no podium, no spotlight could compete with a mother's stained blouse in the 1980s and the president's pen pressed in gratitude. Melania's silence was forgotten. Jasmine's words endured. The letter was more than paper. Now it was a verdict, a reminder, a mirror. America saw itself, and for once, it saw the part worth remembering. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.